Hi, everybody. Charles from GMAT Ninja here. Today, we want to talk about what happens when you're struggling with the GMAT, the GRE, the EA, your score is really low. How screwed are you in the admissions process? When can you overcome a really low score? When can you not overcome a really low score? To have this conversation, brought on two of my very favorite admissions consultants anywhere. Two of the team from Stratus Admissions. We've got Susan Cera, Director of MBA Admissions at Stratus, and Donna Bauman, who is the Senior MBA Admissions Counselor at Stratus. Between the three of us, a little more than 60 years of experience in this line of work. So gonna have a nice free-flowing conversation, try to give you a sense of where you might stand depending on your profile. Now we're gonna build this conversation around two pretty typical profiles. Hopefully you'll see at least some elements of yourself in one of these, if not both. First, we're gonna talk about what if you're that Indian guy, you've got something like a 700 on the GMAT, average grades. Under what circumstances can you overcome that and get into a really good school? Under what circumstances do you need to keep going, struggle for that higher GMAT score? Under what circumstances are you in real trouble? Second type of profile we're going to go through, we're going to talk about a woman with a 650 GMAT who might say that she's from a non-traditional background, whatever that might mean. Feels like maybe there's a lack of prestige in the background. Under what circumstances is that candidate going to be in trouble trying to get into top business schools? And under what circumstances is she actually in pretty good shape? Along the way, we're going to talk about what happens if you are kind of on the low side of things and maybe your profile isn't such that you can overcome that low score. And what are your options at that point? Because what we all find over and over and over is that for candidates who really have a lot going on, really clear career vision, even with that low score, good things can happen. Good things will happen. It just might not be exactly what you think. So we'll get into that as well. All right. So I'm going to start. Susan, I'll pick on you first. So let's take that, again, pretty generic here. Take that Indian guy with a 700 trying to apply to top business schools. And if that person comes in your office and says, hey, Susan, I can't seem to improve my GMAT score. I'm stuck at the 700. Am I in real trouble here? Can I still apply to top schools? What are you asking? And under what circumstances is that person in real trouble with their admission goals?
Yeah, so what I'm going to dig into is who are they beyond their test score in their grades? You know, if they happen to be someone who works in tech and has a really generic profile, it's going to be a challenge for them. But if they happen to come perhaps from a family business, or they work in private equity, or they've done Teach for India, or they have just something really unique about their work experience, then they might be able to get away with a 700. Alternatively, maybe they really have a passion in a certain area, be it sustainability or healthcare, or they want to deal with access to education in rural India. That personal interest and perhaps a personal story around that might allow them to overcome a softer GMAT that's below the averages at the schools that they are targeting.
And to be clear, when you say, really for both of you, when you say below the averages for that school, one of the things we hear all the time from our Indian candidates is, yeah, okay, I'm applying to a school where the average is, let's say, 720. I need a 750. I need a 760. Do you feel like that's true?
Sort of, to be honest. I was on admissions committee at Duke for 10 years, and I was on the, quote, India read team. At that time, the average GMAT score in the incoming classes at Fuqua was about 700. The average incoming GMAT score for Indian applicants was something around 730 or 740. You had to be that really spectacular candidate in a very special way to be accepted with that 700 if you were Indian. And I was the one who read hundreds of those applications because I was the one who could find that needle in the haystack of someone who was just super special and was going to make an impact at Duke.
All right, Donna, you've been kicking around here for not quite as long as I have, but which is why you look better than I do. Why, can you give us a story of somebody that overcame that? So your guy that's the 700, and I'm sure somewhere along the line you've had somebody that you look at.
Yeah.
And then
no, it was someone who did have those stats that you're talking about and really wanted to go to, Harvard, Stanford, Wharton kind of school. That was the piece. And there were some things about him that were differentiators that would say, if you're from India, but you've actually been in the US, or your work experience has put you in a multinational corporation or dealing with, recognizable names, that gives you a leg up. In this particular guy's case, he was in private equity. He had a finance background and actually was working in private equity. When you look at the pool of, Indian men, many more of them are engineers. So that makes you diverse in that pool. And that was something that was important. And then he really had, and this is something we try to do with all our clients, again, articulate that vision of why. What do you want to do? And he had a real vision in investing in companies in India that were trying to build the middle class, to create sort of, more opportunities for businesses, invest in those businesses that were going to create opportunities for more people in India. So it was the kind of thing where the admissions team, when they want to get behind someone who wants to do good things in the world, more than just, I want to make money for me, but actually help people. And when you do that, you stand out, and the admissions team want to get behind you, and they want to help figure out a way for you to be successful. He was also really charismatic. And so, having the ability, I think actually that he might have even done some modeling, which is also atypical. So really presented in a very, I don't want to say jet set way, but just someone that did have a real presence, was really an attractive person and presented himself well. And so those intangibles also really do help, and it can help you stand out.
And Donna, I love the image of, okay, so we have the stereotype of the Indian guys applying for MBAs, and there's all this caricature that fits very few people, but that's sort of how a lot of people think about it. And you're painting this really vivid picture of this fellow who, Indian, had spent some time in the US, jet setter, model, potentially, really cool guy. But to get to that interview, that has to come across in the essays, or has to come across somehow in his application. And I guess, what is it that in that sort of two-dimensional format of looking at this candidate's resume, essays, activities, that it was clear that he had that magnetism that I assume is a big part of why he eventually got into a really good school?
Yeah. So his desire to work in investing in companies that were going to make a difference in India and create more opportunity. And he had sort of a family history and definitely a privileged background where, his parents and grandfather had been involved in some investing and business experience. Him wanting to do more stood out, as opposed to, I just want to, do this to be successful, or not have a sense of what drove him. So he had some really powerful stories about some of the things that his grandfather had achieved, and how he could create more opportunities for more people in India, investing in companies that were going to broaden the middle class. So those are the things that stand out for me, that it was like, if I was on the admission side, and I was on the side, just like Susan, just reading for the other blue school down the road, when you really understand what drives someone, and that they have this vision and this mission of being bigger and being part of something bigger than just, I want to make a lot of money, people remember it, and you do stand out more. And I also remember he had, this was back in the day pre-COVID, when the admissions teams were traveling all over the world and, at all these events. And thankfully we're getting back to that again. But he mentioned how he made a pretty good impression on Wharton's admissions director at like one of those, events where he came into his region in India. So that was something that puts someone on the radar. And that also reminds me of a long time ago, Keenan Flagler story, where there was a guy from India who was in the Indian Navy, which is also pretty unusual background, and a little bit older, but had exceptional leadership through, all of his years in the Navy. And he managed at a reception to talk to our, at the time, dean of the MBA program, made a super impression on him. And there was a note came back, we're interviewing this guy because, Dean X says we're interviewing this guy. I happened to be the one that interviewed him. And I was like, wow, he he was impressive. He punched above his, in this case, the GMAT was like, I think mid 650s. So way below what pretty much anybody could expect to have much success. But he broke through because of his personality, because of the, uniqueness. So that's where I never like to say never, because I've been in this long enough to see, it's not like it happens every day, but if the right combination of things happen, people can break through the clutter, punch above their weight, all of that. So
I love it. I think I'm hearing 5 things, and please, you two, jump on me if I'm missing anything or if I'm misconstruing anything. So I think there were kind of 5 factors. So thinking about the 2 candidates you mentioned, so 650 Indian guy, naval background, you had this 700, 710 Indian guy, private equity background, ended up getting into really good schools that you wouldn't necessarily expect given what typically happens. I think I heard 5 factors. One is there was, certainly in one case, a very genuine interest in helping people, doing more for society. And just as importantly, there was some depth underneath that. It wasn't just, hey, I have aspirations to do good things. There were all these stories where in some way or another, he had lived that. It was a fundamental part of his values beyond, we all want to help people. But he had something behind it that really made it credible. Sounds like that's the second thing. Maybe a less conventional occupation. So private equity, obviously plenty of applicants in private equity, fewer Indians, plenty of military applicants, but once again, fewer Indians who are applying from the military. We see a few here and there. Fourth might be that it helps to have a background where you spent time in the US or somewhere else in the West. And fifth thing is charisma, but I actually think there's a different chunk that I think I'm hearing from you, Donna, that is tactically or practically what you want to do as an applicant. And that is make sure that you're not a stealth applicant. If you can go to these events, communicate with admissions committees in some way. And we realize that the world has changed since COVID and there's fewer opportunities to do that in person, but visiting campus, networking, doing as much as you can to make sure that they can see you as a human, you give yourself at least some chance to make an impression. That it sounds like you're suggesting that if you're trying to punch above your weight in admissions, that's important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Wherever you can do it. And sometimes it's not by telling, it's by showing. So for example, if you're at some kind of event and there's, whether it's virtual or whether it's in person, and everybody's clamoring, for that one admissions person, you can show that you're a team player by saying, oh, you see that someone else is in the conversation and you bring them in, which you might think, oh, I need to compete and I need to make sure I get my airtime. But by letting someone else have the airtime, what the admissions person is observing is, wow, this is a person who's welcoming, bringing in people, making my job easier so I don't have like 5 other people staring, waiting for the entree into the conversation. You're bringing them in. So, some combination of that might have happened at both of these receptions where these 2 people that I, came across my sphere did kind of break through.
And before I move on to the other profile, Susan, anything else we're missing? So if we kind of think about those different dimensions of ways to punch way above your weight for, this poor Indian guy with okay GMAT score and what would sort of superficially look like a very typical profile. Anything else? Any other things that they could do to punch above their weight or characteristics that might allow them to really stand out besides the things we mentioned?
Yeah, no, I don't really have a lot to add. I totally agree with what Donna said. And it was reminding me of a story from back when I was at Duke of someone at one of these events who not only stayed and engaged with the admissions person who was on site somewhere halfway around the world, but when the event ended, that individual stuck around and continued to chat with the admissions representative while stacking up chairs and cleaning up the space. And this was someone who falls into your other category of being non-traditional and a woman who really made an impact and was someone who, on the surface didn't necessarily believe in herself. And I don't think she was conscious of, I'm sticking around and helping to put up the chairs. But that really made an impression on admissions.
Interesting.
And they realized she's a great fit for our program.
Interesting. So I guess that's a good segue into profile number 2. So we see a lot of these certainly, from our tutoring students. We see a lot of female candidates from non-traditional backgrounds by their definition. Hey, I come from a non-traditional background. Therefore, my 650 GMAT is not going to be enough for top schools. I need to either knock the cover off the GMAT, GRE, EA, or else I'm screwed. We hear that all the time. Susan, when is that individual really in trouble? When should she really be worried and maybe need to really push and scratch and claw to raise the GMAT by 50 points or 100 points? And when do you see people overcoming that?
I've seen a lot of people overcoming it. And it's when you have, as in the case of, our fictitious Indian individual, when you have a really interesting story to tell and a unique perspective to bring to the class, to a program, and you're going to make an impact and leave a legacy at that program. So, what does that look like in real terms? Maybe you were in Teach for America, or maybe you spent time in the Peace Corps. And this is unique exposure to entirely different people than the consultants and the investment bankers have engaged with. Or perhaps you're someone who works in marketing and has done a great job pulling off events in the marketing space. And that's just different. It's the skills that you bring to an MBA classroom are not necessarily the ability to do a discounted cash flow or run numbers and build big Excel spreadsheets, but you understand people and you have skills in understanding who your audience is, how to adjust your communication to them. Maybe you are great at building trust with people who are different from yourself. And having that perspective in a classroom or in a learning team is incredibly valued by the admissions committee.
And the yeah, but I hear all the time, and I can think of several candidates we've worked with in the last 6 months who say, yeah, but I'm going to have to do the discounted cash flow and I'm going to have to do the Excel spreadsheets. And there's nothing on my profile that says that I can. So I've got to get a super high GMAT score. I've got to prove my quant chops, for example. How true is that? And if somebody has some of the backgrounds you're mentioning, Susan, so it's something like marketing. We were swapping stories earlier about opera singers we've worked with. Something like that has a background, okay, Peace Corps, and then went into something that was non-quantitative. Maybe there's a humanities undergraduate major or something like that. How much proof is enough that they're going to be okay quantitatively? When can they let's say they're stuck at a 650 with just an okay score. What else can they do? And when are schools willing to overlook it?
Yeah, so ultimately the test score is just one data point. And if, for example, you're a humanities undergrad, maybe you haven't had math since high school. There are some great classes you can take that are going to allow you to dust off some of those quantitative skills that you need in the classroom. And you should probably take those classes anyway, so that you don't show up on day one of accounting and have, your head splitting when someone starts talking about LIFO and FIFO and you have no idea what they're talking about. But we often recommend MBA math as a great kind of prep course. It takes 15, 20 hours of work. That combined with a 650 GMAT with a commendable quant subscore is probably sufficient. Schools don't want to bring in people who are going to struggle with the quantitative rigor of a program, but there's more ways than one to demonstrate your ability to do that work. It doesn't have to be your GMAT or your GRE.
And I'd add in another thing that we do when people are thinking about who's your recommender and how can that recommender amplify your story. So if they've seen you do, some quantitative things at work, or it showed some analytical skills that perhaps aren't elsewhere seen, that they can help, assuage any sort of relieve admissions people, because they just worry that they want to make sure the people that are in the program, they can do the work. And it really, there are a lot of places they can find it. So if they hear it from the supervisor, that's also another way that they can share that.
Okay, so what I think I'm hearing, please yell at me if I'm misinterpreting this. So this sort of candidate that we've seen dozens and dozens of over the years that goes, my score is not good, I'm non-traditional, I'm going to struggle, I'm bad with the math, I'm bad with the spreadsheet, maybe is the type of narrative you hear. Often great stories, if the stories are there and those skills that are maybe less quantitative, so the ability to read a room, to connect with people, to bring people together, to communicate, all of those sorts of skills, incredibly valued by MBA programs, even though it doesn't show up in your stats. So there's that as a starting point. And then the challenge isn't as mechanistic as we might think, I think is what I'm hearing from you too, that we tend to think of the process as, okay, we're in this competition to have the better stats and the better averages, when in reality, sometimes it's, hey, this is a candidate who's going to fit supremely well here and be really great. Now what we're interested in, yeah, it'd be nice if she can raise her GMAT averages, of course that'd be nice, but we want to know if she can do the work. And what I think I'm hearing is a bunch of ways to show that. It might be that your recommenders are communicating that, hey, this is somebody who actually has a really good quantitative or analytical mind when asked to do so in a practical context, which a standardized test usually is not. It might be the case that they can take some other coursework to help show that their skills are there. Is that all fair? Is there anything I'm missing or misconstrued?
I think that's
it.
yeah.
Awesome. Then the one thing, so a question we get all the time from students is, okay, so if I'm in trouble, I don't feel great about my GMAT score in the end, especially the quant section, what should I take? We tend to recommend MBA math to people as well, because that's something that's become so widely recognized. Is there anything else? Is there value in adding, let's say, going and taking, let's say an economics course, microeconomics or statistics or accounting or something? Is there value in doing more than that? HBX core, does that help at all? Or do you typically see that, hey, the MBA math is enough and we can move on?
I would say the MBA math is nice because it's comprehensive, that it really has thought through, these are the areas that you need to show some mastery and you can show the program. But if you have a little bit more time and you're thinking out ahead and you're saying, where are some of my weaknesses, and you haven't had, financial accounting or microeconomics or calculus or statistics, and you have the time to take one of those courses, ideally for a grade so that the school can see how you performed, that's just another thing that would show that you're serious about this and that you have self-awareness on where your weaknesses are. And that's something, to say, hey, I understand I was a religion major. I didn't do as much on the quant side. I recognize that. And, a year or 6 months before I took this course, that could be helpful. I think that the HBX core course is pretty widely, recognized. It's certainly, don't make the mistake to think that just because you take that somehow you're going to get a green light into Harvard. They'll be happy to take your money for that course and prepare you, but I don't think but there are a lot of different options. And I think anything that works for your budget and your schedule, it is moving the needle in the right direction. So.
Excellent. So anything else, Susan, anything else you'd add to sort of the ways to overcome?
I think one thing I would just add to Donna is it depends on what your undergrad performance was. So if you happen to have been a French literature major and had a 3.9, great. You can show that you were an A student. If you need to show that you're an A student now, but you maybe had a 3.2 undergrad and just had some hiccups undergrad and haven't taken quant stuff, the class that I recommend, there are 2 online classes, one through UC Berkeley Extension and the other through UCLA Extension, that are essentially MBA math on steroids, where you get a transcript. And those are the ones that I point people to, because they'll give you that kind of broad introduction to all of the different types of quant that you're going to get in business school: finance, accounting, stats, econ, as opposed to doing a deep dive specifically on accounting or finance. And depending on what school you end up at, you might have to retake accounting anyway. Some schools will waive or let you, place out of a class, but others, regardless of whether you're a CPA or you have never seen a T account before, you're sitting in intro to accounting. So, just another option for demonstrating that both the awareness and the ability to do the work when you hit the ground in business school.
And I guess for either of these sort of broad categories of applicants that we're talking about, how much value is there in retaking the GMAT? And let's say GMAT, GRE, EA, any of them, just to show that you're trying. One of the myths we run into all the time is, no, I need to show my best score and that's it. I don't want schools to see when I struggled with the GMAT. Is that really true? So first, is it really true that schools don't want to see your struggles and they'll ding you for that 520 that you got before you got the 650? Question number one. Related, for this category of student that, let's say, again, 650-ish, not a lot of quant in the background, do schools just like to see the effort of retaking multiple times?
I'll jump in on this because I had a great conversation that I reflect on at least once a week in having conversations with prospective clients. And it's a conversation I had with the former director of admissions at Columbia Business School. And they have a question on their application saying, how many times have you taken the test? Because imagine, Charles, if you and I both have a 710 with a 48 quant, but I took the test just once and you took it 3 times. And perhaps your journey started at a 640, then you got a 680, then you got a 710. And I took it once, I got a 710. It's good enough. It's within the range. When Columbia looks at those scores, they're going to look at Charles and say, he recognized that he wasn't good enough. And he tried. And it demonstrates self-awareness, which is an important quality that admissions committees are looking for. When they look at my score and see that I took it just once and had a 710, they got to wonder, doesn't she realize that our average is a 730? Why didn't she try again? And therefore, you are set up in a more favorable light. Although they don't super score tests, they will look at multiple scores. And you might say, hey, I took it once and I got a 690 with a 48 quant. And then I retook it and I flipped my verbal and my quant. I still have a 690, but I got a much better score on verbal. And maybe you want to retake it to see if you could score your best on quant and verbal in the same sitting and then bump up to that 710 or 720. There you've taken the test 3 times. It's not a bad thing. There's no shame in retaking the test. You don't want to be taking it precisely on the day that you're eligible to retake and running yourself out of your 5 tests in a year or your 8 lifetime tests. I've seen people do that. You want to make sure that you're going into each test prepared to do your best. So anything to add on that, Donna?
Yeah, no, I think we just see it so much that people are so afraid of showing failure. And I think business schools want to see they want to see everybody has failures. And what do you do when you have that, obstacle? And the people that just keep going. I'm thinking about a guy that I worked with this year who really he ended up on the GRE and he never really, cracked the code fully, but he chipped away at it and he, systematically took it, 2 or 3 times over the 9 months I was working with him. And while on the wait list, he eked it up. And I think he went from a 318 to a 322, just enough where now he's, off the wait list. He's in at an M7 school. And, I think that showing that I'm willing, because some people are just saying, you know what, it is what it is. I'm not doing it. I'm not going there. And that's 90% of the people, I would say. Though that 10% that is willing to say, I'm just going to try one more time. That's a quality. That's the kind of person you want on your team. That's the kind of person you want, in the trenches with you. So if anything, people can just sort of get out of their ego and not think, oh, this is like, I'm a bad person. You are not your test score. And if you show effort that you're doing everything you can, I've seen it pay dividends for people.
So before I start talking about what do you do if, hey, you're kind of listening to this and going, oh, I'm gonna have a really hard time overcoming this score. I've already taken the test 3 times, 5 times, 7 times. It's not moving. This is what it is. I've really tried. What do you do? I want to get into that in just a moment. The 2 things that I heard you both highlight that I don't think I hear often enough, and I don't think applicants hear often enough, it's this idea that you're showing self-awareness. And that's part of what you're communicating with however you might handle the testing and academic side, by trying to help yourself by taking MBAMath.com or a beefed up version of that or some accounting stats econ courses. And by retaking the test, you're acknowledging a weakness, and that we shouldn't be afraid to show the failures, and that can actually help show you as a 3-dimensional candidate that we want in this school. If you've had those failures and overcome them, it might actually be better for you than if you've never had the failures at all. Fair?
Fair. Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Excellent. All right. Last thing before we wrap up. I want to talk about the situation where somebody's sitting here going, oh, I don't think I can overcome it in the ways that these people are talking about. What do I do? And in particular, what we tend to see from our incoming tutoring students, who are often maybe not as far along in their thinking about what they want in a grad school than they are by the time they get over to Stratus. But one of the things we hear a lot from folks who are just starting their GMAT journey and they're maybe struggling on the GMAT, and they kind of go, well, you know, I'm only thinking about the top 3 full-time 2-year programs. I'm only thinking about the top 7 or top 10, top 15. And it's this thinking that is purely in the, I'm going to do a 2-year full-time MBA at this set of schools that are in the rankings. And sometimes those folks get their butts kicked by the test, or maybe their profile has other holes in it. They're soft in some other area on paper. And a lot of those folks who end up going, wow, I'm just never getting the score that's going to get me into a top 7 or top 10 school. The ones who are really devoted, what we see is they always land on their feet. And I'd love to hear from your perspective, if you're in that situation where, hey, maybe you've already applied in a couple seasons, the top 10 conventional program's not happening. How do people land on their feet? What else should they consider? What kind of successes do you see from people who don't quite fit into that elite 2-year MBA, but once they broaden their minds, good things happen? And whichever you would like to hop in, go for it.
I've got an example this year. And as we were preparing for this, I was talking about how I'm always so excited when I have successes in the situation, but all my successes are weighed down by someone who didn't get into a school that they really wanted to go to, despite the fact that they put forward a really strong application. And one guy that comes to mind from this year came to me with a 710 GMAT. It's not so great. He wasn't an Indian, but he was, there wasn't, he could have done better. And he was earlier on his job, his professional journey, wasn't super a standout in terms of leadership outside of work. He insisted that he was only applying to Harvard, Stanford, and MIT. Those are the 3 hardest schools in the US to get into. And I tried to get him in round 2. He ended up on a wait list for one of those schools without having been interviewed. I tried to get him to think about Wharton in round 2 because he had a very strong interest in sustainability. And he kind of came away with, well, I'm in this job at an early stage startup that when I talked to a guy at Wharton, he said he dreamed to have my job when he finishes at Wharton. Why would I go to Wharton? And I said, well, guess, maybe you don't need to go. In the end, he applied to a master's in finance class locally, and he's going to be doing that part-time. Because what he really needed from business school was to get theoretical finance so that he can lead the finance and strategy for this early stage company that he's in. And in his mind, he's like, maybe in a couple of years when I need more on the leadership side, and he's got really great soft skills, but maybe when I need that, I can go get an executive MBA or one of the mid-career MBAs. So I'm super excited that he'll be starting at LBS this fall in their Master's in Finance program.
So the thing that looked like a failure to him in terms of not getting into the 3 schools he was interested in ended up being something that actually led him to better introspection in a way. And he found a program that probably fit better than Harvard or Stanford or MIT might have anyway.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that I can think of someone who was going through the application process and looking at full-time programs and having some medium success with that. And in the end, this person really liked their job. And it turned out that the Anderson, and I'm a big fan of Anderson's FEMBA program, that full-time MBA program, because seems like it's a very good hybrid where you're taking some courses with your cohort in the beginning, but then you're kind of free to move about the cabin and actually just take electives with the full-time MBA programs. And actually, some of my clients that were in the full-time program and in the FEMBA program, they were actually in some of the same social events and going on some of the same trips. So they really were having a blended experience. And this is a case where if someone likes their job, they don't really necessarily want to leave that job always. And I think there are more options for people to, look at MBA programs where they can, kind of have a little bit of the best of both worlds. For example, in Chicago, Booth and Kellogg have both had, very strong part-time MBA programs, sometimes a little bit more accessible for, people a little bit lower on the GMAT dial or GRE dial to get in. And yet, having great experience. And, as a Kellogg alum, I can tell you that when I've gone to reunions, the people that are in the, evening and weekend programs, they're mingling just like everybody else. It's all one big Kellogg family in the end. So there definitely is more than one way, to get somewhere. And sometimes if one door is just not opening, maybe it's time to there might be a better way.
So just give people food for thought who might be going, oh, wait a minute, what is this broader ecosystem of programs I might consider? So we have the graduate degrees that are not MBAs, so masters in finance, masters in management. There's masters in real estate development. You can get into really specialized things. There's the non-MBA master's degrees. There's the one-year programs that often sort of evaluate applications differently. There's the part-time, evening, weekend. There's executive MBA programs, and I think we all run into plenty of candidates who are kind of right on that cusp where you're in that, let's say, 29 to 33 range where you could go full-time. You could fit an executive MBA also. There's specialized MBA programs. Cornell Tech MBA is one of the ones that jumps to mind. Anything else in that ecosystem of MBA programs? I guess the January intakes at some schools often are kind of a whole different admissions pool. Anything else I'm missing for the programs that people should think about more broadly if they're struggling?
Sometimes I had a woman I worked with who really had a couple of things that were not working favorably. Her career was in somewhat of a hiccup. Her GPA was sort of middling, and the testing was not going well. And she broadened to look at some of the European schools. And, there really are a lot of options, especially if you want to have a global career, to never mind, just doing the study abroad, actually just go and spend, a year or two. Some of the programs are only a year, so that can also be another option. But, ESADE, IE, HEC Paris, INSEAD, which is unique in that you do have to have that language. You got to make sure you have another language, so that's, difficult if you don't have that. But there really are a lot of, I've had people, Cambridge Judge, Oxford, lots of programs to look at. Also, sometimes Canadian MBA programs. So those are all, I think, fair game.
Yeah, I was going to say exactly that, Donna, because I'm thinking of someone who ended up, going to LBS. And one reason why the European programs are a great option is that they are not competing in the rankings arms race for U.S. News and World Report and Bloomberg Business Week. They just don't play that game. And Don and I both attend an AGAT conference every year. And I think it was last year, maybe the year before, when we had an event with London Business School, and the admissions director said, look, we're not trying to bring up our GMAT average to 730. If you have evidence to show that you can do the work in our program, we're fine. If you have a 690, that's fine. Show us other ways that you're prepared. So I do encourage, look at those European programs. In LBS, especially if you want to get your feet on the ground in the US, because LBS has a pick your own adventure. You can pick a 15-month option, 18-month, or 20, and you could do a study abroad at a US school that maybe you're in the entertainment industry and you want to spend a couple months in LA or in New York, or you are in the tech industry and you want to get feet on the ground in Boston or the Bay Area. If you're at LBS and you can do an exchange back to the US, fantastic. You can build your network in that way.
All right. Before we wrap up and I say a few final really good things about you two for the people that have stuck with us for 40 minutes, anything else to add on this topic for either of you? Anything we've left out?
I would just say broadly, try to separate your self-worth from your test score. And, recognize that whatever you want to do, sometimes I work with some people that are they're amazingly talented. Actually, I'm thinking of a woman Susan and I both worked with several years ago who really did not have the test scores, did not have the GPA, had exceptional leadership, did amazing things, went to a really strong business school, and is now working at like one of the elite consulting firms. So it's like, if you want to do something, go do it, figure out a way, and don't let that voice in your head tell you that, there are a lot of ways to get somewhere. And
Donna, you probably saw my face light up when you said that about don't let the test be your self-worth. for what it's worth, I did an exercise like 10 years ago now where I said, hey, if you said to me, hey, you're going to have $100 million to start a business and you have to pick the 10 former GMAT students that you're going to start the business with. Not going to tell you what business, something terrible happens to you and your family if you don't succeed. You'll have all the budget you need. You pick 10 people that you think are the most talented, well-rounded, however you want to phrase it, business minds you trust the most. And I took my roster of students over the past 5 years and I picked the 10 people where I'm like, if I had to work with 10 people, these would be the ones. And then I looked up their GMAT scores. And I think exactly as the two of you would expect, the GMAT scores had nothing to do with it. There was somebody in the 400s where I was like, oh, Michelle here? Yes, like absolutely. She was an absolutely disaster. I think we might have gotten her in the 500s in the end, but it was kicking and screaming, right? So we tend to get into this cultural thing where the test score is who you are, or it's some measure of your intelligence, or it's a measure of how good you are. And it's like, no, it's a measure of how good you feel in little bubbles. And that's worth something. It's not to say that isn't important, but it's certainly not what we sometimes make it out to be. So I love that. Go for it, Susan.
Yeah, so I'll echo what Donna said. I often say to people, don't let 3 digits define you, whether it be out of 800 or out of 340 or whatever the heck an EA score is about. I can't tell you how many times when I read applications at Duke, and this really dates me, it was when they were on paper, but I would see an Indian applicant that had like a 780 or a 790, and I'd go through their whole application and I'd write just a big not sign on the front page. Take away the 780, you got nothing. I don't even know what this person would bring to the program. A 780 is not going to get you in, but a 690 might. So, but don't let that number define you.
I love it. That's perfect. Before we wrap up, for anybody who's stuck with us for the full 40-something minutes so far, thank you so much for sticking with us. Real quick, the reason why I like these two and dragging them on our channel here, the two big things when I say that, hey, when you're looking for an admissions consultant, here's the people I recommend. What am I looking for? It's really two big things. It's the brutal honesty. So it's when you go to somebody and say, hey, let's say I have a 650 and I want to go to a top business school. Do I trust them to steer you straight and say, hey, this is what it might take to get in there. Here's a rough sense of your chances. Here's what you might need to improve. Here's what you might not. There are salespeople out there at many companies that will just say, of course you can get in. And that's not the reality of how this works. So thank you to both of you for being so honest with all the clients we've shared over the years. Second thing is, it's sort of an admissions decision season. I start getting emails, and the ones that really put a smile on our faces as tutors is when the student or the consultant lets us know, or however we find out that somebody got in and we go, whoa, how did they get in there? And these two are good for a bunch of those every season. So we always look forward to those emails as we get over to the decision parts of the calendar, because I always get good surprises from these two. All right, with that, Donna, Susan, thank you so much for doing this. If you're looking for an admissions consultant, call these two. If you want to hear more about them, you can email us and I'll say more. All right, thank you everybody for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Great.
Thanks, Charles.
Bye.